Jenna Ellis in the morning on American Family Radio.
I love talking about the things of God because of truth and the biblical worldview.
The U.S. Constitution obligates our government to preserve and protect the rights that our founders recognize come from God, our Creator, not our government. I believe that Scripture in the Bible is very clear that God is the one that raised up each of you, and God has allowed us to be brought here to this specific moment in time.
This is Jenna Ellis in the morning.
Good morning. It is Tuesday, April 23rd, and true conservatives around the country are still very frustrated with Congress for passing the $95 billion foreign aid spending package over the weekend, with $60 billion going to Ukraine, funding both sides of the Middle East conflict, and also funds going to Taiwan, while not securing our own border. Representative Chip Roy out of the great state of Texas tweeted this yesterday: "The American people are overwhelmingly with us on the issues, border security, spending, and weaponization of government, etc. We must shed the fearful conventional wisdom in Washington and lead boldly with freedom and American security at the forefront." So Chip Roy joins me now. Good morning, sir. And I wish that more conservatives in Washington agreed with this sentiment and were willing to be bold. What is going on that it seems like there is just a uniparty and the speaker is doing everything that the Democrats want?
Yeah, Jenna, great to be on. I just want to be very clear to start off with your listeners in particular, and you, and I know you know this because you just led with it. Look, I voted for Israel funding in November. I strongly support Israel. I offered to the speaker and had whipped in favor and had worked hours upon hours to get unity among the Freedom Caucus and conservatives who strongly believe we should pay for every nickel of this stuff before we send any foreign aid. Israel was unique. After the attacks on October 7th, we were willing to put the bill on the floor, have a vote, and move it across, even though it would be unpaid for. But they wouldn't do that. And so Israel became a part of this package on purpose to move the entire foreign aid package along with Ukraine, to send it over, despite there being no border security, despite the fact that the Israel funding included $9 billion humanitarian aid, as you noted, a good chunk of which can go to Hamas, despite the fact that Ukraine, that we do not have a clear mission. And all of this is coming before the American people are getting, the safety and security they deserve at home. I had to vote no. I unapologetically voted no. I would vote no again. And the image of having members of Congress waving the Ukrainian flag on the floor of the House when the American people are suffering, and when we have people dying from fentanyl poisoning pouring across our border, and when we have people like Laken Riley getting killed, and when we have 24,000 Chinese foreign nationals who have come across our country that we know of that were apprehended since October 1 alone, it is unconscionable that Republicans supported this and have the audacity to be a part of criticizing those of us who didn't. And that's the state of play right now among Republicans, and we're going to keep our foot on the gas for the American people.
And Speaker Johnson responded on Newsmax to why there was no border security in the bill. And I want your response to this clip. This is cut one.
Why is the border not in this package? Because, Greta, we didn't have the votes to do it. I have a handful of my Republicans, at least, who will not advance a rule to bring that to the floor to combine it with the Ukraine and Israel funding. They won't do it. And so if I don't have Republican votes, that means we have to have Democrat votes. Yeah.
And so your colleague Thomas Massie posted that clip with this comment. He said, "This is purposefully misleading. He, the speaker, never tried to combine a bill to secure the U.S. border to a bill that funds the wars in Ukraine and Israel." Do you agree with that assessment?
All right, so there's two pieces to this. I want to be very clear because honor matters, and I want to be very straightforward as it relates to speaker here. Number one, there's a specific question. We had a vote last week where they separated the bills and had a separate vote on H.R. 2, on the border bill that we already passed, right? We already sent it over to the Senate. They changed it. They took out E-Verify because now some of our members wanted to water it down because of E-Verify. And then they added some language to pay some of the states back. So I told the speaker, I said, look, I don't love this. I don't like it strategically. I think we're going to give cover to Democrats. And I'm certainly not going to vote for this rule to put this across that'll basically be a part of this sham package because Republicans wanted a cover vote. They wanted to confuse the American people that we were somehow going to include border. Let me be very clear. It was a separate rule designed for cover. It would not have been combined or attached to Ukraine. It was happening at the same time, but was separate, designed to fail. Thomas and I and Ralph Norman opposed that in committee, in the Rules Committee. Separately, if the Speaker is saying generally that he was saying, well, I can't get the votes for that, there'll be people that will oppose putting them together. The Freedom Caucus was generally standing ready to figure out how to move Ukraine funding with strong border security. The question was what it would look like. How could we get it done? So we were working with the Speaker and saying, we will work round the clock. Stay here through recess. Let's figure out what we need to do. But the Speaker would never put it on the floor, saying simply, well, I don't think we can do that. Here's the bottom line. The Speaker really wants the Ukraine funding, and he thought that this, at the end of the day, was the best way to get the Ukraine funding and Israel funding done. And he was worried about making the Democrats mad by forcing a Republican-only version across the floor. I will concede that it was a fight because there's a lot of Republicans who just didn't want to spend any money on this stuff without paying for it and were concerned about giving another dollar to Ukraine. But people like me were saying, I will work with the conference to move a Republican-only bill if we can have Israel plus Ukraine plus real border security, something like H.R. 2, send that over to the Senate. I believe that if the Speaker puts that on the floor, we get the votes for it. More importantly, put it on the floor and find out. And then if some people vote no, then you can say, well, let me come up with some other path. But the last point is this. The Speaker spent 6 months saying, I will not move Ukraine without border security. You either mean it or you don't. He clearly didn't.
I'm speaking with Congressman Chip Roy out of Texas, and that's what's mind-boggling to me is that Speaker Johnson has spent 6 months, as you just said, saying that we won't secure anyone else's borders before our own. This has to be a package. And then without testing that theory, and of course, you can do the whip count, all of those things, sure, but he didn't even bring it up for a vote so that he could at least say that he tried. So what is really going on with Mike Johnson? I mean, we've heard Pastor Jack Hibbs, who's a very dear friend, posted a video last week, even ahead of the vote, suggesting that there may be, some other things going on in D.C. and to pray for Speaker Johnson and, not to give up hope, but, wasn't really clear as far as what his conversations in Washington were. So we're kind of getting some different views from, I think, a lot of people who know Mike Johnson and who, like me, really wanted him to do well, and yet we're just seeing that the evidence and the proof of his leadership in fulfilling his promises just isn't there.
Well, let me just start with this. I, too, wanted him to do well. And I, of course, still wish him and his family, well and pray for him, and he's under enormous pressure. Look, Republicans are up against a wall. Chuck Schumer, the Biden administration are insane. And with all due respect, we also get a lot of pressure coming out of the former President Trump, on things like this loan idea, repo idea, which, by the way, we included in this bill, but doesn't do anything. At the end of the day, it was like basically a loan provision for $8 billion of the $60 billion going to Ukraine, with 50% of it the president can just unilaterally forgive, and Congress can forgive the rest. I mean, it's kind of a joke, and that became a part of the mess, and there's been reporting on that. So. Look, I'm going to call balls and strikes. I don't believe this bill is something Republicans should support. It should be noted a majority of Republicans voted against the Ukraine provision. 55 odd, I give or take one or two, 55 Republicans voted against the rule. That is unprecedented to even move this bill to the floor. Even the conference chairwoman, Elise Stefanik, voted against the Ukraine provision in the bill this weekend. And that's what we're up against. And with all due respect to the Speaker, look, leadership matters. You've got to be willing to go stare down the other side and say, Mr. Schumer, you're not going to get $1 of Ukraine funding. You're not $1 out of Republican support here unless you secure the border of the United States. And if you won't do that, we will see you in November. And then people would say, well, but Chip, then Ukraine would fall. One, I don't believe that the Democrats would have then walked away. I think they would have showed up at the table if they knew we meant it. You've got to negotiate like Governor DeSantis does in Florida, right? You got to mean it, and then people will respond.
Yeah, and a lot of people are suggesting that maybe Speaker Johnson just simply wasn't prepared to do that. And I mean, I remember you and I having these conversations in the midst of the battle for who would become Speaker after McCarthy was ousted. And with all due respect to Kevin McCarthy, it seemed like he would have at least done perhaps a better job of some of this negotiation just because of his prior experience. So do you attribute this with Mike Johnson to simply being overwhelmed, simply being unprepared for the challenges of Speaker, or have his priorities genuinely changed? Because in another interview I saw on C-SPAN, he was telling a reporter that after this classified briefing, he sees that on the FISA issue, for example, he sees that reauthorization is necessary, which fundamentally goes against everything that he's been saying for the last 7 years in the House Judiciary Committee.
Yeah, so this is one of those things that happens in D.C. And, I had been getting updates from the various people involved about what the status was in Ukraine, for example. Obviously, FISA, we sat in the, it's called the SCIF, like where you do intel briefings, right? We sat down there with, former intel leaders from the Republican administration and others listening to all this stuff literally like weeks before. I'd heard the same stuff Mike had heard. Then there was questions being raised of me and others saying, well, have you gone into the SCIF about Ukraine? And technically, I had not. I'd gotten the briefings that were not, in the SCIF. So I went before I voted. I went down to the SCIF. I got all the briefings, talked to a general, talked to people that were involved directly, overseas. And it was literally what I knew it was. They used that as cover because there's no way to really peel it back. Think about it. Like, I'm prohibited by law from even talking about what I talk about behind that wall, right? And they're able to say, oh, if you just had access to these intelligence briefings, you would understand how critical this is to our interests, and particularly you just know the real facts on the ground with respect to Ukraine, or what would happen if there's a warrant, heaven forbid, a warrant requirement to look at America's information gathered by intelligence agencies. And it's hard to fight back, right? Because you're going to have the Wall Street Journal editorializing and saying Chip Roy is an isolationist who does not believe in, protecting American strength. What is wrong with these knuckleheads? They take down rules and they're breaking the House. You're up against that kind of a message. But here's the good news. There is an increasing number of us, a large block of us, who are done. We're not going to play the Washington swamp games anymore. We're going to call them out. And if that makes us unpopular sitting around the table in the bowels of the Capitol, then so be it. But the American people need to know the truth. And so we're trying to do that. We're trying to expose it. I'm willing to take all the arrows. I've got some of my pro-Israel groups who are mad at me and saying you're walking away from Israel, and I take that's personal. I mean, I biblically believe in standing with Israel, but not blindly, not stupidly. Not in a way where we're funding Hamas and funding Israel at the same time. So I'm going to speak out and say what I believe is the truth and let the cards fall.
And that's commendable, and that's actually standing for principle. And so to be clear, in the last minute that I have with you, nothing that you saw in the classified briefings versus what the rest of us who don't have access to that know in the public domain changed your opinion on FISA, on Ukraine, on any of this, that such that you think that the Speaker can legitimately use that as an excuse?
I do not believe so. I do not. I still believe the warrant requirement would be helpful in making sure Americans are protected with respect to FISA, and I believe they can continue to operate and carry out the intelligence they need to without being limited if we had that protection in place. With respect to Ukraine, I can't say what I talked about behind closed doors, but I can just tell you, yes, it is public knowledge. Ukraine has bled through a whole lot of money. They're running out of stuff that they need. They're running out of bodies, all the things that we all know publicly. And I do want to find a way to try to help them stand on the wall against Putin, but not at the expense of our own national security, not without a clear mission, and not without making sure that money is no longer being wasted and that we're paying for it, because we are $34.5 trillion in debt. The dollar's getting weaker. Our economy is getting messed up, and we need to stand up for the people.
Amen to that. And thank you for standing firm on principle, even though it is a small minority at this point of conservatives in Washington that are doing that. It's those of you like you, Thomas Massie, Bob Good, and others in the Freedom Caucus that really give us hope that we have representation in Washington. So thank you, Representative Chip Roy, as always, for stopping by. We'll be right back with more here on Jenna Ellis in the Morning.